The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Wellness Wednesday on W4CY Radio within the Entertainment Network. My name is Holly Kenley. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and host of Kenley's Keys for Recovery. Thank you for tuning in. It's so good to be with you. I often say wellness awaits each of us. We choose the time. And by listening in today, you have chosen wellness. You see, I believe that most people want to be healthy in their lives, and yet sometimes we need a little help. And that's what this show is about. We're here to inform you and restore you. What do I mean by that? Well, each week we'll take a topic of recovery, such as grief or addiction or depression, or a social issue or behavior that presents a challenge to our mental health or well-being, such as domestic violence, betrayal, bullying, and stress, or it could be both. And each week we're going to do these two things. First, we're going to grab hold of keys to understanding what we are experiencing and going through. I believe that when we have an understanding as to what's going on and why, that in and of itself is the first step in recovering. And then secondly, we're going to get the keys to unlock your recovery. We're going to examine specific healing steps, strategies, tools, or exercises to become engaged in our recovery. This is important. I believe that there are no quick fixes. Recovery is not a noun or an adjective. It is a verb, and it takes time and hard work. You'll often hear me use the word recovering with an ing because it means that it takes action. Sayings and platitudes are wonderful only if we put them to work. Also, we're going to move one step at a time, one day at a time, sometimes one breath at a time. We're not going to cover 15 topics in 15 minutes or 20 different things to change. Why? Because when we feel overwhelmed with too much information, we won't do any of it. Lastly, what makes this show special is that we're going to work hard at staying with topics and themes of each month. However, if something comes up in the news or you let me know about topics that interest you, we may dive into those. If it's not in my area of expertise, I will tell you and look for resources that can help you. I do want to mention that some topics may not be appropriate for minors, and I will let you know. Today on the show, we're going to be discussing got holiday stress, readjust, release, and rejoice. We'll be back in 60 seconds. Grab a cup of coffee or tea, sit back, relax, and breathe. Let go of the stress and take in some healing information. Let's start today. Let's start now. Let's grab the keys and begin unlocking your recovering. This is Holly Kenley, licensed marriage family therapist and host of Kenley's Keys for Recovery. For the past several weeks, we've been covering some pretty important and heavy. I thought that with the holidays right upon us, I would take some time to lighten things up a bit. After all, this is supposed to be a happy time of year. Then I started listening to people as they were discussing Thanksgiving plans, Christmas, Hanukkah celebrations, and others, and all I heard was stress. How many of you have been hearing comments such as these? I've got all these people coming to dinner and no one really helps. Or our families really don't get along, but I guess I can live through it for one evening. Or how about this one? Things are really hard financially. We really don't have the money to buy the kids what they want, but I don't want to disappoint them. I don't know how we're going to pay for it. And here's another. I just hate traveling over the long weekend. It's such a headache. Another one. I don't know how I'm going to find the time to get the shopping done, cooking and cleaning. I work all day. I don't think anyone understands the pressure I'm under. And one final one. We've had a rough year. I'm really dreading the holidays. After I started really paying attention to what others were saying and feeling, and after I began asking some friends what was stressful about their holidays, gosh, I wondered whether today's show was really going to be that lighthearted. So today I thought it would be important to share some insights, a couple keys of understanding into what I think causes our holidays to be so stressful. Then in the second part of the show, I'll try to keep it light by sharing some of the common stressors and some keys on how to make our holidays a whole lot more fun. And at the end of the show, I'm going to share a personal story about the holidays, one that humbled me, one that caused me to come to believe that when it came to holiday stress, I was my own worst enemy. Let's get started on today's topic. Got holiday stress? Readjust, release, and rejoice. First, let's take a look at two keys for understanding what is at the root of our holiday stress. When it comes to holidays, I believe almost all of us have what I call celebration saboteurs, or in ordinary terms, our expectations. Yes, let me say it again, expectations. All of our own perceptions, thoughts, beliefs, mindsets about how things should be. And typically, how we think things should be goes along with it being the right way, and for some, the only way. Let me give you an example. Just a little over a week ago, I was getting my nails done, and two women were having pedicures start talking about their recipes for stuffing, or some people argue that it's called dressing. Well, that part of the conversation actually went pretty well. Then they started debating whether the turkey should be stuffed or not. One woman was adamant that the dressing should not be put in the turkey, while the other woman was practically outraged at such a thought. Listening to this heated exchange, I thought about how silly this was, but it demonstrates my point about expectations. We want things to be a certain way, and no other way is acceptable. If we take a closer look at expectations, we begin to understand that one reason they're so strong and ingrained within us is typically expectations are based on long-standing traditions or family rituals or customs or generational influences or all of those. And so what happens is that over time, when a certain way of doing something is practiced over and over, even if it is a custom or tradition that's not working well or serving the family unit well, there's often strong resistance to change and possibly even anger if it's altered in any way. This causes stress for everyone. I want to give you a perfect example of this. A few weeks ago, a close friend of mine, I'll call her Karen, was telling me about the family drama over the large Thanksgiving celebration that her relatives partake in. Over the past 20 plus years, Karen's sister-in-law has been hosting the Thanksgiving dinner. Well, over the years, it's grown from a small gathering of about 6 to 8 family members to over 60. Last year, Karen's sister-in-law announced that she just couldn't do it anymore. Somebody else needed to take it over. Well, no one did, and the Thanksgiving dinner never happened. People were hurt, upset, and angry. When I asked Karen why no one else was willing to host the dinner, other than the obvious reason of it being a ton of work, Karen said, "We all just really like having it there. It's where we've always done it. And it wouldn't feel like Thanksgiving if it weren't at my sister's-in-law house." There we go with those naughty expectations. Well, along with wanting things to remain certain ways based on past patterns or customs, there's another really important part to understanding the impact or the hold that expectations have on us. This is important. If family dynamics have been unhealthy, if there have been relationship problems, if there's been conflict, difference of opinions, or unresolved issues between individuals, and by the way, I really don't know of any family that there isn't this in there someplace. Well, there's a huge blanket of stress and sometimes even dread over what can or will be expected of the holiday gathering. Privately and perhaps openly, family members want the holiday to be better or for everything to go smoothly. They want everyone to be on his or her best behavior, of course, for everyone to just get along for once. But there's always this worry of the same patterns of dysfunction repeating themselves or the fear of more problems. This, too, causes stress. Many years ago, I was working with a couple, and I'm going to just give them the anonymous names of Bob and Sarah. Their adult daughter, and I'll call her Nicole, was an addict, and they were working on their relationship with her, and also on their years of being very codependent with her. Well, as the holidays were approaching, Bob and Sarah felt so stressed. There were so many special holiday dinners in the past that had been ruined by Nicole's addiction. She'd show up late and high and usually get mad at someone or something. Nicole would cause a scene, and when Bob or Sarah confronted her, Nicole would storm out of the house. Well, during the time I was working with Bob and Sarah, Nicole had just finished another treatment program. And although they were hopeful, Bob and Sarah didn't want to have their expectations too high for fear of being hurt and disappointed again. Of course, Bob and Sarah were feeling extremely stressed. So, there are two important keys to remember about expectations. Although expectations themselves are a natural part of who we are and are an outgrowth of the norms of our families, if we cling on to them too tightly, they can cause us to be rigid, uncompromising, and uncooperative. And secondly, because of unhealthy experiences, unrealistic expectation can lead to more disappointment, hurt, and further complicate family dynamics. All of that adds stress. The good news is there's some steps we can take to make our holidays more flexible and fun, and I'll get to that in just a bit. The second major key to understanding why the holidays can be incredibly difficult and stressful is what I call the profound and poignant presence of loss. Let me say it again, the profound and poignant presence of loss. During the holidays, as families gather to celebrate as one, to embrace all of our traditions, customs, and rituals, remembrances or memories of past celebrations often surface, sometimes catching us off guard. Whether the memories are of loved ones who have passed and whose presence is missed deeply, or of the reminders of relationships that remain unrepaired, or of personal or interpersonal wounds that are reopened because of triggers that accompany family gatherings, the profound and poignant presence of loss creates a stress that is entwined in grief. An example is several years ago I was working with a male client. I'll give him the name of Robert. He and his wife went through a very nasty divorce. Robert had not only been very close to his wife's 3 daughters by a previous marriage, but Robert had a biological daughter with his ex-wife. Because Robert's ex-wife was so unstable, he would never know what the holidays were going to be like. Would he have his own daughter with him? Would he be allowed to see all 4 girls? Would he be alone? As the holidays approached, Robert experienced such stress as well as grief. Not only were there feelings of loss from the dissolution of the marriage, but Robert missed his daughters greatly, and they too missed him. Another example is just this past March, my husband's older sister, Ruth Ann, passed away from cancer. Ruth Ann loved Christmas like no one else I've ever known. And although as her 3 daughters grew into lovely young women, married with their own children, and it was they who took over the hosting, Ruth Ann was always at the center of everything. As Christmas approaches, I can't imagine how her 3 daughters and their families are going to navigate through this time. The loss of their beloved mother will permeate each and every family member. Ruth Ann was and is so deeply loved and missed. The magnitude of loss for this family will manifest in many ways, and they will all feel the stress of it. Again, the comforting news is that there are healing steps we can take to help soothe our pain, and more importantly, how we can honor our grief in healthy remembrance of the losses we feel. We will touch upon those in just a bit. As we get ready to go to break, I'd like you to do 2 things. Think about 2 things. First, what expectations do you have for the holidays, and how flexible are you with those expectations? And be honest with yourself. And secondly, what is hurtful or hard for you about the holidays? And are you willing to release those feelings in healthy ways? Let's take a second break. When we return, we'll get to 3 recovery tools for holiday stress. You're listening to Kenley's Keys to Recovery. We'll be right back. Let's take a second break. When we return, we'll get to 3 recovery tools. This is Holly Kenley, licensed marriage family therapist and host of Kenley's Keys for Recovery. Today we're talking about got holiday stress, readjust, release, and rejoice. We've taken a brief look at what is underneath our holiday stress, and we've discovered that there are basically 2 important causes. If you just joined us, I want to review for just a second. First are these expectations, or what I call celebration saboteurs. Because we either hold on too rigidly to our perceptions or beliefs about the way things should be or the way we want them to be, or because of past painful experiences and desperately wanting things to be different or better, we experience holiday stress. And then the second key was the presence of loss. During the holidays, where we come face to face with the losses in our lives, either loved ones who are no longer with us, or we're confronted with memories of loss because of broken relationships or injurious experiences, again, we feel stress. Okay, let's get started on 3 keys to recovery from holiday stress: readjust, release, and rejoice. We're going to begin with readjusting our expectations. Before the break, I asked you to think about your expectations for the holidays and about how flexible you are with those expectations. Why did I do that? Because our first key in reducing stress is to readjust our expectations. Let me say it again, being willing to readjust our expectations. As we get started, I do want to say, as I alluded to in the introduction, that expectations are a natural part of who we are and a normal outgrowth of our families. However, they don't always serve us well, especially if we are too rigid with them and if we do not communicate them clearly. Again, at the end of the show, I'm going to share a true story with you. And even as I think about it now, I'm still a little embarrassed about my rigid and righteous mindset regarding my expectations. Okay, so key number 1, readjusting our expectations. I'm going to give you 4 suggestions to consider. First, if you are hosting the holiday celebrations, clearly communicate what your expectations are. If you want others to help with food, expenses, actually working in the kitchen, let them know. If you want to change something or you need to do something differently, communicate that ahead of time. I want to go back to that example that I was talking about earlier about the large family Thanksgiving dinner with my friend Karen, the one that's up to 60 people. Well, just the other day, my friend Karen told me that her sister-in-law, with some arm twisting, agreed to host it again this year, one more time. But her sister-in-law said it would have to be catered. Karen said that at first there was concern, there was resistance, but after some effective communication, some problem solving, and people readjusting their expectations, the problem was solved. Everybody agreed to have it catered, and everyone is looking forward to Thanksgiving dinner, especially Karen's sister-in-law. Another example about Thanksgiving is about 5 years ago, I was hosting our family Thanksgiving dinner, and I think I must have been feeling kind of stressed. I don't know. But I wanted to express my expectations to my family. So I wrote up a little poem explaining 2 things, what everyone was supposed to bring and how everyone was supposed to help. Now, I emailed this out ahead of time, and I made my expectations very clear, but also very clever. And I want to just read you a little bit. I'm not going to read off everybody's name and what they were supposed to do, but just to kind of give you an idea. This was called the Kenley Thanksgiving Menu and Sharing. All pilgrims big and small, dinner awaits in the dining hall. Turkey, stuffing, potatoes fill the plate, each pilgrim eager to participate. Okay, and then I listed all the different dishes and who was supposed to bring what. Then the poem went on. All the work can be a pain, but not when pilgrims share in the gain. And again, I listed every job that each person was supposed to do. And then I ended it. One last request is asked of all, for a little humor seems to soothe the soul. So share a riddle, a joke, or funny line. Let our Thanksgiving be a joy-filled time. Well, everyone thought it was funny, but at the same time, you know what? I didn't have to say a word at dinner. Each person did exactly what I had requested, and my stress was reduced to nil. Okay, so suggestion number 2. If you're attending or are a guest at a holiday celebration, keep in mind that you are there to help in any way possible and respect the traditions of the host family. Keep your mind open, and if you find yourself passing judgment, thinking critical thoughts, comparing what you would do to what's being done, I'm going to give you a little exercise to practice. It's a 3-step cognitive exercise, and it's one I've done myself, many other people have, and it works. Okay, you're finding yourself being judgmental, thinking something negative, something your expectations aren't being met. You're going to do 3 things. You're going to catch the thought, stop it, and replace it. Okay, let's go back to the first step. You're going to catch yourself thinking the negative thought. We have to come to terms with that we are indeed being judgmental or negative. Second thing is we want to stop that thought and recheck yourself. And then thirdly, we can't think 2 opposing thoughts at the same time. So you're going to replace that negative or judgmental thought with something positive, something appreciative, perhaps for even being where you are or being invited. Okay, so practice that exercise if you find that your expectations are not being met, and it helps to readjust them. Okay, a third suggestion. There are so many other stressors and expectations of the holidays. I mentioned some of those at the beginning, such as gifts and travel plans, expenses. The key is communication. This is really important. As situations change, as people experience hardships, or as families grow and move, rituals, traditions, and customs cannot always stay the same. Talk these things over as a family ahead of time. The other day, I was talking to a young man who was doing some work around our house, and he was telling me how stressed he was about Christmas because of the electronic devices that his two daughters wanted for presents. He said, "You know what, Holly? They're just way too expensive." Well, I asked how old they were, and he said they're 8 and 10. And so I suggested a couple of things. I said, first, why don't you sit down with them and make a list of the items they want and put a price next to each one. We're not going to burden them with, your feelings or what's going on with you and your wife, but this can be an opportunity to teach them about money and about the value of things. I said, secondly, you can either have the girls prioritize the items and explain that each daughter can expect their first choice or perhaps their first and second, or have them make 2 columns, one for the expensive gifts, maybe one for the less costly gifts, and explain to each daughter that they can choose one item from each column or whatever's going to work for them. And as we were talking, he said, "You know what? My girls love to do this. They love to problem solve." And I reminded him that children are resilient. And you know what? Sometimes they even come up with better solutions than adults. So the point is to talk about it ahead of time. Another example is as families grow and get larger, sometimes it's almost impossible to keep the gift giving going. And families feel so much stress about this. Well, we can be so creative in dealing with this. Sometimes families draw names. They give gifts just to younger children. I know that when my family, our large family, kind of reverted to that when we just said, okay, it's just going to be the younger children. Sometimes families do away with individuals' gifts altogether and just do a family gift, or they just do away with the gifts. Let's remember what matters most to the family and to discuss it and be flexible and be willing to do things differently. And also, again, as I said, communicating this ahead of time so that everyone has time to readjust their expectations. Okay, a 4th suggestion for readjusting expectations is boundary work. Even after we've settled on our expectations and clearly communicated them and made necessary adjustments, it's oftentimes necessary to have clear boundaries, especially if there are some unhealthy dynamics within the family. A little earlier, I talked about the couple, Bob and Sarah, with their daughter, Nicole, who's an addict. Well, after Nicole was released from treatment, Bob and Sarah felt that she was using again. Their hope and their expectation was that they were going to have a holiday dinner without incident or confrontation with Nicole. So, as extremely difficult as it was for Bob and Sarah, they set a boundary with Nicole. They decided that if she was using, she was not to come to dinner, and they were going to communicate that to her. If she did come to dinner and they felt that she was high, Nicole would be asked to leave. After setting their boundaries, Bob and Sarah shared how much of the stress had already been relieved. Again, I know this is difficult to do, and it takes hard work and sometimes guidance of a counselor or therapist to reset and reshore up boundaries. Let's move on to the second key, the overall key in removing holiday stress, releasing. Earlier, we discussed how the presence of loss in our lives contributes to stress of the holidays. This not only includes loved ones who are no longer with us, but also the reminders or realities of loss within current relationships or past painful experiences. This kind of stress is very private and personal, and it must be dealt with individually, and yet sometimes it needs to be addressed as a family as holidays draw near. Customs, traditions, and rituals may need to be changed, revisited, or even replaced. This is a tender process, as some family members may want to hold on to certain practices in remembrance of their loved ones, while for others it may be too painful to maintain some traditions. So, as I'm going over this key in recovery, as we're talking about releasing, there are several connotations and applications. First, if you're a family dealing with the loss of a family member, I would encourage you to talk about how you wish to enter the holiday season. Communicating with one another is critical to releasing the expectations that each of you holds for your loved one and in the honoring of him or her. It's so important that your individual and family expectations are met and satisfied in the ways that are meaningful and purposeful for each of you. Although this is very difficult to do, holding on to private expectations and then being hurt when those aren't met intensifies your grief and compounds your level of stress. Of course, as I mentioned, it is important for each person to process his or her grief individually as well. If you're a family dealing with estrangement issues, broken relationships, or division within family systems for a myriad of other reasons, this causes enormous stress as well. It is important to practice releasing what you cannot control or change and letting go of the heavy weight of emotions that accompany those dynamics. Remember that the time we spend wishing it could be different, hoping that someone else will change, or expecting that the next time will be better, keeps us tied to our grief and to our stress. There are several exercises and ways I'm going to give you to release your pain, your disappointment, and or even the individuals themselves. And with all of these, it's important that they really need to be practiced ahead of attending the celebration or the event, or even as you're just kind of entering into the holidays to begin doing this. This first exercise is a cognitive exercise again. I want to just say as a side note is that I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, and many times individuals believe or think that their feelings determine their thinking. And some people may believe that, but I really believe and work from the premise that our thinking determines our feelings. So if we can change or alter our thinking, then many times we can change what we're feeling. So this cognitive exercise, I've used it over and over again. Friends have used it, clients have used it, and when I go over it, I'm going to reference myself. It's just easier to explain it that way. This is a 3-step exercise, and it's called the 3 R's: reality check, reframe, and release. Okay, the first step is a reality check. Okay, let's say I'm holding on to this relationship with this person that I'm estranged from, or it's a broken relationship. And so what I want to do is just do this reality check, and this is what I say to myself. You know what? The relationship has been broken for a really long time. In fact, it's been broken and unhealthy longer than it's been healthy. So for me to spend time thinking that it's going to get better just is a waste of my energy. Okay, so that's my reality check. Number 2 is I'm going to reframe it. Instead of trying to hold on to that, I wish that person would change, what I'm going to say is, you know what? Whatever that other person is doing is working for him. That's what he needs to do. That's his life. That's his truth. And that's what he needs to do to honor himself. Just like I need to do that for myself. This is what I need to do. These are the choices I'm making. And so I'm reframing the unhealthy situation in that whatever is going on, each of us is honoring our truths and it's serving us. And then the third step, release. And this one can be tricky, but it's really helpful. Is that when I release this person and let go of him, is that I wish that person well. I wish blessing on their life. I wish them wellness. I hope that the holidays bring them just, again, all the blessing and encouragement and support that he needs. So again, that is it works. Try it. It's so important. Again, the 3 steps: a reality check, reframe it, and then release it. I'm going to give you a few other things that you can do to help in this releasing process of no matter what, the loss is, but especially if it's a brokenness within family. Sometimes I have individuals that like to journal, pray, or meditate, and they're releasing their emotions to their God, their source, their power. And in fact, if you're into journaling or praying or meditating, you can take that exercise that I just gave you and incorporate that into that. Another thing that I've had many different clients and individuals do is to, again, re-embrace or integrate practices or hobbies that provide releasing and cleansing. That might be, we commonly think of exercising, going and doing a good workout, walking, jogging. I've even had one client that what she did is that she went out and gardened, even in the winter time, is that she got out in the yard and just did some digging. And also during that digging and gardening, she did her releasing. So sometimes hobbies and those practices that we use in our daily lives, but get that 3-step R exercise, reality check, reframe, and releasing going as you're doing those. Another suggestion in releasing is, and hear me out on this, is writing a letter to the person or persons who have caused you injury or injustice. Get them emotions out, let them flow, write all that you want to feel, write until you have nothing more to say. All right, and then my suggestion is do not mail the letter. Instead, discard of it in ways that are releasing to you. I've had clients burn them, bury them, put them away. Sometimes the emotions resurface again and again, so it's helpful to go and reread it and then put it away. I remember years ago I was working with an elderly client. She was married for almost 60 years, and I'm going to give her the fictitious name of Marion. Well, her husband abruptly left her for another woman, filed for divorce, and also left her with a ton of debt that Marion knew nothing about. Well, she was struggling, of course, to work through the multiple losses and betrayal. And as the holidays were approaching, Marion could not seem to release her anger and her deep pain. As she and I worked together, she decided to go ahead and write this letter. And boy, did she write pages and pages and pages. And then, along with a ton of stuff that was still in her attic, Marion tossed it all into a dumpster, including the letter, and watched the truck come and drive it away and pull it away. And afterwards, she said, "You know what, Holly, not only did she find that so releasing, but she said, I really felt that I had kind of rid myself of the layers and layers of betrayal and of the losses." So again, this can work. I highly recommend not mailing the letter. Another suggestion, and some of you might be having a little difficulty with this idea of releasing, and so other individuals can like the concept of forgiveness. So if that resonates better with you, if you're used to that whole idea of forgiving, which I just think of it as a different way of letting go, but utilize that in whatever your methods are that work for you. And I just want to remind people that forgiveness is very oftentimes, and releasing, it's not a one-time process. It has to be done again and again. That's normal and it's to be expected. So we've talked about loss in the literal sense and how to honor and release that. And then we've talked about loss where we have these estranged or broken relationships or unresolved dynamics within relationships. And I want to go to that third type of loss. And this one is really important, as the others are. Holidays can be reminders or triggers of past painful experiences and of personal as well as interpersonal losses. This too exacerbates stress. We again can practice releasing of those memories, those triggers, and those emotions that come with them. And I'm going to give you some suggestions for that right now. Again, these are best implemented and you'll get better results if you do this ahead of time. The first one is to schedule time privately to honor your past experiences and truths, and to practice them, releasing them in the ways that I've described above. And I'm going to give you another exercise in just a minute as well. But in the letter writing or the journaling, the praying, the meditating, and even implementing that three-step exercise. But again, do that privately, honoring your truth and your experience. An example is because I've worked with so many clients over the years that have had to work through very abusive experiences, many choose to avoid their betrayal environments, and that is their truth, and they should honor that. However, there are others who can and do decide to return over the holidays. Again, this is so important. Before they head out to their respective places of celebration, they spend as much time as needed preparing themselves, releasing residual pain, and setting up protective boundaries and practices. They have these tools at their fingertips and they're ready to implement. Something else I just want to mention as it goes along with the losses, but holidays are also a really, really risky time for relapse into addictions or substance issues, or regression into any type of unhealthy pattern of thinking, behaving, and feeling. So what I'm going to be going over right now also helps deal with those as well, along with triggers of interpersonal pain and losses. Okay, first of all, it's really important to be aware of your triggers and how they impact you. And sometimes I'll even suggest to clients we will go over together making a list of triggers. That can be people, places, things, sounds, smells. It can be so many different things. So really know and remind yourself what those triggers are and how to impact them. Okay, earlier I gave you an exercise, the 3-step one, catch the thought and the feeling, stop, and replace it. This one is an adaptation of that. I'm going to add a couple steps, but this one works so well with these triggers and these really uncomfortable feelings and emotions that come up. Okay, I'm going to kind of just use myself as the example that helps it explain it better. Okay, let's say I'm at the holiday celebration and someone says something that triggers me. I get this horrible feeling inside. Okay, I'm going to catch the thought, right then and there, and this uncomfortable feeling. I catch it and I connect it to the trigger. The trigger is this person, not the person themselves, but what the person said in this case that I'm giving you. So I've got the thought. I've connected it to this person and what the person said. I'm going to stop the thought. Okay, this yucky feeling that's going on with me and the thought that's causing it. I'm going to stop it. And then this next step is super important. I'm going to calm myself. And there's lots of different things I can do. I can do some deep breathing. I can do some what I call imagine rehearsal. I'm actually going to put some things on my blog, some different ways to calm yourself. But the third step is to do this. Now, this part's important, calming. If I need to step away from this person, this environment, do that. I may need to step into another room, into a quiet place, so that, again, I can really calm myself and then not return to the place until I'm ready. The fourth step is to go back what I said before, to replace the thought. Okay, redirect your thinking. We can't think two opposing thoughts. I'm going to replace the thought. And then the fifth step is I'm going to reassert my present reality. I'm going to remind myself that where I am now, focus on something that's important and that it's pleasing and peaceful to me. And if I find myself being pulled back, again, I'm going to go through that process of releasing the past and bringing myself back to the present. So again, catch the thought, stop the thought, calm myself, replace the thought, and reassert my present. Again, I'll give you that information on my blog today. That exercise is wonderful and it works really well. In our discussion today on holiday stress, we've examined the causes behind it, issues around expectations and loss, and we've looked at 2 recovery keys: readjusting expectations, releasing our losses. Now let's focus on our last key for recovery, rejoicing. This is the easy one. Gosh, with the hardships of life and with the added stresses of the holidays, I think we often forget that we do have people, places, and things in our lives that bring us happiness, joy, and meaning. And I say that, rejoice is a choice. And I'd like to just encourage individuals and families to reassess priorities and to reintegrate personal and interpersonal practices in their lives that bring them meaning. For example, I've talked with so many families, especially over the past several years when things have been so hard, and they've scaled down the commercialism of the holidays and learned to reframe what it means to celebrate. They're just rejoicing in time to be with one another, spending time together, and building new memories. Other families are reintegrating and re-embracing spiritual or faith-based practices and really re-emphasizing the importance of it in their traditions. And still other individuals are finding ways to give back to their communities, serving hot meals to the homeless shelters, running food drives, gathering gifts for needy families, and the list goes on. Here's an important concept when it comes to rejoicing. When we have all this stress in our lives, these unmet expectations and loss, our focus goes inward. We focus on ourselves and our needs. And yes, I always say and believe that it's important to honor our truths, to take care of ourselves. And as I always add, after we do, it's then time to look outward, to put our focus on others, especially those less fortunate. By looking for areas where good is needed, by seeking to do good, even in our own families, in the moment, we can't help but rejoice. As we get ready to close for today, I want to share a personal story with you. As I mentioned earlier, as I think about this years later, I'm a little embarrassed about how rigid and righteous my own expectations were. But it taught me an important lesson about expectations and how they can create and cause so much unnecessary holiday stress. Here we go. It's called Great Expectations. After hosting Thanksgiving dinner for my family and my sister's family for a dozen years or so, both families decided that we needed to make some changes. Our kids were in college, and it was becoming harder and harder for everyone to get into one place. So in 2001, my husband and I did not host Thanksgiving dinner. Instead, we were invited to my husband's niece's home with all of her family. We were excited to see everyone, and it was not too far of a drive, about an hour away. After inquiring about the number of people, the time of dinner, I asked how we could contribute. We were asked to bring a ham. When my husband and I arrived about 2 p.m, we were surprised at what we found. In fact, I felt disappointed and really confused. My initial expectations were far from being met. First, all the women, my sister-in-law and my 3 nieces-in-law, were nowhere in sight. I quickly learned that all the girls were out shopping for the day, a family tradition of theirs. My thoughts were, this is rude. Why aren't they here to greet us, to welcome us? Didn't they remember we were coming to dinner? As I looked around the house, everything seemed so surreal to me. Nothing was like I would have it. All the guys, my brother-in-law and husbands of nieces, were glued to the TVs with sports blasting from multiple screens. It was so loud that everyone had to yell to hear what someone was saying. And the 5 young grandchildren were galloping through the house like wild horses. More loud noise. After quickly judging the situation, I mumbled to myself, this is not what would be going on in my home. My children would be playing games outside or creating musical performances for our enjoyment later. And the noise, yikes. My brother-in-law would be playing his guitar, softly serenading us while my sister, my husband, and I cooked. I looked around to see if there was any evidence of a family dinner taking place that day. Putting the ham in the refrigerator, I noticed that nothing was prepared or even cooking, except for some rolls that were thawing. I peeked into the dining room. Nothing. Again, my expectations quickly reared and roared in my head. I can't believe this. The table is not even set. I'd have my table set. Where is the turkey? Why aren't the potatoes peeled? Why isn't anything ready? I would never do this. I returned to the den with the TV blasting and the noisy kids, sulked and continued to pass judgment on the entire situation. This was certainly not the way I had ever entertained guests and how I would do things. I continued to wallow in my righteousness. At around 4 o'clock, my husband's sister, and her 3 daughters finally arrived home. Their arms were full of packages and bags filled with goodies. Entering the house, their happy faces filled the room with love and laughter. The kids went running as they saw the piles of gifts, screaming with excitement, and everyone had settled down. My niece Katie, whose home we were in, sighed and casually suggested, "Well, I guess we should get started on dinner." As I sat slumped on the couch, still festering in my rightful resentment and utter bewilderment, I cautiously asked, "Would you like some help?" Still wondering how on earth a turkey could be ready in 2 hours. My niece replied with a huge smile, "That would be great. Follow me." Over the next 2 hours, the kitchen started to buzz. As Katie took control of the side dishes, I set the table for 16, peeled and mashed a giant pot of potatoes with 1 beater, made a strange mud-like gravy from their family recipe, which was not easy to do without turkey juices, crafted together an unusual mixture that resembled dressing, and prepared the ham. As Katie and I gabbed and cooked, I found myself beginning to loosen up and let go of all my unmet expectations, and I started to laugh and have fun. Then as Katie's husband attempted to deep fry the turkey, we all watched in horror as the oil overheated, spilled out onto the cool decking of the pool, and basically petrified the turkey. After the burnt carcass was retrieved and everyone was relieved no one was hurt in the process, we all laughed hysterically at the sight of a bark-like stump resting on the platter. For just a moment, I could hear myself think these thoughts. I would never try something like deep frying on a holiday dinner. What is wrong? And then I stopped myself. My expectation was simply a judgment on them. I stopped and readjusted my thinking. As I was leading the charge of cleaning up the massive mess of dishes after dinner, with the TV still blaring, with the kids still wild from the sugar highs of dessert, and with the men conveniently snoring away in their recliners, I reflected upon the evening. This celebration was theirs. It was filled with chaos and joy and overflowing with love. And yes, it was not the way I would do things, but it didn't mean that mine was any better or that mine was the only way. Mine was simply different. In closing, I want to wish you much wellness over the holidays, and I want to dedicate this message to my beloved sister-in-law, Ruth Ann. Remember, if you have holiday stress, readjust your expectations, release your losses, and then in the presence of those that are with you, rejoice. Wellness awaits each of us. We choose the time. Now is your time. Grab the keys and unlock your recovery. Until next time, believe and be well.